I'm Mike Costello, and I'm here with Dr. Freelander, and we'd like to talk to you today about the fact that you can be encouraged in the face of discouragement. And that sounds like an impossibility, but we know that in the midst of being discouraged, which is lacking courage, we can have great and wonderful courage, can't we, Iris?
Yes, we can. Sometimes other people can give us a hand up, and other times it's our own thoughts, or sometimes we just live in that way so that we look at the bright side. And I say we, there's all different types of people. And those people are happiest, I think, who are able to, in the face of discouragement, see the bright side. And there are many who do that, aren't there?
Absolutely. And as we're discouraged and as we work with individuals who are discouraged, one of the exciting things that I find is that as we talk through the experience and process the time and the experience, it is the discouragements of life that show us really how strong we are. And that's true for all of us. And, and it's very, very appropriate that you point out that the things that we talk about on this program are true for Iris and Mike as well as they are for anyone else. So often people will say, oh, well, you don't have any problems, or you don't have any, because you have all of these jewels of wisdom. Well, we all have jewels of wisdom. We all have principles, and we share them, and we do the best we can. But our lives are all peppered with experiences, both positive and negative. And so we all become discouraged from time to time. But as we face discouragement, whatever it is, and one of the things, as you've heard in my lecture so often, I always tell people, well, if you aren't discouraged right now, just wait a while. It's coming. If you aren't sad, just wait a while. It's coming. All of those negative and difficult times are coming, and that's really a sign of life, and not something that we need to avoid at all. And so we don't need to avoid being discouraged. We don't need to avoid being sad. We don't need to avoid being hurt. And that therein lies a real problem, because in many cases, especially in New Thought and in other circles, people believe that by denying these things that they can avoid them. And that avoidance, we know, or that denial of them, is really detrimental in so many ways. So we're going to be discouraged. And so in the face of discouragement, and as we work through discouragement with all of us, we can all look back on discouraging experiences and see that it was at times of discouragement that we drew upon our faith and our strength and created the courage that we needed to have to face the circumstance and the situation. And so even though we are discouraged, we can be encouraged, because we know that discouragement, whatever it is that's caused it, whether it's a financial difficulty or the loss of a job or whatever it is, a health challenge, limited financial resources, not one of us has avoided that, or few of us, whatever it is we face in life and become discouraged about, that in the face of discouragement, that discouragement can bring us an opportunity to draw within ourselves our inner being of faith and strength to be guided and directed in ways that we never would have imagined. And so many, many people tell us, and so many of us, if we really think about it, can reflect upon the fact that had it not been for the discouragements, the failures, the hurts of life, that we would never have come to be the people that we are, and we never certainly would have ended up where we came to be. And I just think about people, and we've talked seemingly on this show and other shows so often about the loss of jobs, but the loss of a job just brings such discouragement, and limited financial resources bring such discouragement to people. And when we're in the midst of that, we sometimes focus so fully and completely on that negative experience, upon that discouragement of it. But in those times, at the time that we lost the job, at the time that we didn't have enough money to pay the rent, those are the times that we can look back on and say, my goodness, I somehow got another job. I somehow was able to find another place to work. I somehow was able to make ends meet. It's amazing when we talk to people who went through the Great Depression, how they'll talk about that was the most difficult time, but out of the difficulty of that time, so much richness came because the resilience that was created through it. And it is that wonder and magnificence of discouragement. And life is a mystery. And, sometimes we say, well, how can these negative experiences be at all positive? Well, in fact, they are, and they can be, and they always are, because they bring us such wonderful lessons.
Yes, and we have memories of conquering those problems, and that gives us energy and sustenance to go on. And during the Depression, I have an aunt who was a young adult during the early part of the Depression, and she used to say that she remembered losing a dime. She was walking down the railroad tracks from her home to buy something that was very needed, and she lost her dime, and she cried really. She was a young adult, but she cried really hard because she lost the dime. And but yet, people look back on the Depression, I think, more fully as to how it brought families together, because families didn't have very much, so they gathered in each other's homes for meals and for companionship and recreation. And so that was a very positive aspect, wasn't it, to that terrible, so-called terrible Depression?
The good old days.
Yeah.
The good old days. So often we talk about the good old days, and one of the things about the good old days was they were pretty discouraging days. And if we look back in history, historically, pretty much there wasn't a great time to live. We're living in the greatest time to be alive at this point in world history, and yet we are discouraged in some ways about life, and that's understandable. But when we think about the fact that we have come so far as a people, we've come so far as individuals, we've come so far in our own inner being of developing the resilience and the strength and the dynamic faith that we need to have. And that can be the encouragement that we have in the midst of discouragement.
Yes, I can remember my dad when he was 91 years old saying, we're living in the good old days. Don't let anyone tell you they're in the past. This is it. This is as good as it's ever been. And that's a very positive way to look at life, and many people do, fortunately. Again, we can offer encouragement to others when they're down, and it lifts our spirits too, doesn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it just our physical presence. And one of the things that happens in the midst of discouragement is that or any negative experience, but certainly in the midst of discouragement and depression, there is a tendency to isolate. And when we isolate, and when we fixate, when we begin to fix our thinking on the problem or on the discouragement or on the negative situation, then we become paralyzed. And out of that comes fear. And out of fear comes that inability to live, the inability to breathe. So often people who are discouraged will say, even from a physical standpoint, I can hardly breathe. And that's true. It is so oppressive. And that is true of that experience. And so it is in those times that we need to be able to draw upon the kind of thinking that we share and that we work through with so many people. And we all do it. You and I have done it. You and I have had challenging lives, both of us, and difficulties, despite what anyone may think. And it's true of everybody. It's true of everyone's neighbors and coworkers. We're all in this magnificent experience of life, and we're all going to be discouraged from time to time. And even the strongest and the most noble and the greatest among us are discouraged. And in that discouragement, we can have great hope, and we can have great faith and great understanding, and we can be encouraged as we are discouraged.
Yes, and I can remember one of my sisters saying, well, Iris has had a really sad life, as if some of them were saying, well, I lived a carefree life. But we all have sadness in our lives, as you just said. So if anyone would ever look at another person who's really happy and outgoing and seem to be on top of the world, well, we might just look underneath the surface there and see that they have the ability, that person has, and I'm not just saying you and I are like that, but many people are like that they have the ability to grieve, to be sad, to go through a crisis, but they do it in such a way that they know that better times are right there. Better times are immediately at hand. And when we think of life in that way, and that's true, better times are always immediately at hand, because it's how we think about it that matters, that makes the difference, isn't it?
Absolutely. How we think about it and how we respond to it. And going back to this issue of isolating and fixating, uh, one of the things that we all need to do when we become discouraged is we need to reach out to other people. And if we know someone who's discouraged, we need to reach out to them. And by reaching out, it doesn't mean that we have to say anything so profound, and it doesn't mean that we have to go and embrace them. And although that doesn't hurt either, but it does mean that by being with them and supporting them, that's helpful. As a very practical aspect, and this issue of avoidance of isolation in the midst of discouragement, so important, is that individuals who become, all of us, when we become discouraged in life, when we're faced with discouragement, we need to surround ourselves with other people. We need to get out of our isolation. And if it doesn't mean, so many people say, well, my discouragement comes because my family's all gone and I have no friends. My discouragement comes because I have no money. I can't do what I want to do. My discouragement comes because I'm sick and I can't do this or that. But if at all possible, we can go out and we can walk. There's so many places that we can surround ourselves with other people and get out of our isolation. And then secondarily, we can shift our way of thinking to other people. And for those who are not faced with limitations of physical health that bring upon their discouragement, they can do things for other people. Volunteering is a wonderful way.
Yeah. Yes, it's a really great dichotomy that when we're going through a crisis of sadness, of anything that creates sadness in our lives, we should not be alone. But on the other hand, to grow spiritually, we need time alone, and we need time for meditation, we need time for introspection. And the great teachers in the past, I understand, the Master Pythagoras and others, had people go through like 2 years of silence or 10 years of silence or longer. And we know that's true in many cultures in the past, and perhaps still to this day. But we have to differentiate between, are we being alone because we're retiring from people, or are we being alone because we have a rich inner life? And that would make a difference, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. And we do need that time alone. We need the time alone, but then we also need to be aware of the fact when that aloneness moves from being alone to being lonely and creating that dynamic in our life. We'd like to pause at this point in the program and offer you the opportunity to receive some literature so you can continue to study the ideas we're sharing with you.
We would like to offer you the opportunity to receive one of these free booklets to further your understanding of the New Thought message of confident living. Each month we will feature a different booklet, which will be mailed to you free and postage paid. Simply address your request to Confident Living at P.O. Box 7726, Long Beach, California, 90807.
I think in the last half of the program, we need to talk about some practical aspects of how we can deal with discouragement. And I think one you touched upon before the break, and we can't get away without talking about it, and that is we need to meditate, don't we?
Yes.
And meditate. When we say meditation, so often from a clinical standpoint, or a counseling standpoint, or a spiritual standpoint, people kind of look at us in a strange way and say, "Well, do I have to cross my legs and say certain words?" But and it goes back to the issue that there isn't a real right way or a wrong way, but this issue of meditation and the understanding of when we are alone and when we do spend some time with ourselves and with the presence and the power of God, the infinite, in the midst of our discouragement, we can do so in meditation and prayer, of which are two different things, and we can touch upon that. But meditation and silence are tremendously lacking in Western society and in our culture. And because of it, we have such a stress-filled life. and it is so energizing and revitalizing and so encouraging in our discouragement if we can enter into a time of reflection and meditation. And quite often the meditations, if we develop them to the point of having regular meditations, whether we're depressed or not, and we, of course, you and I both teach people to do that all the time, everyone that we talk to and counsel and work with. But if we teach people to meditate, then in the process of the meditation, often we find that individuals can find that the source of their discouragement is really something within themselves, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And they find that they come on that with great joy, because it's quite a revelation to people when they find that life is so simple. The secret of a happy living is so simple. And it is very simple, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. It is as simple as can be, but we've made it so complex. And we've made it complex because others have told us that it isn't. And, others have told us that when you're discouraged or when this happens or that happens, that your reactions need to be a certain way. And we can change our way of thinking, and we need to change our way of thinking. We start out with our children, sadly, by telling them what they can't do, instead of telling them what they can do. And so we can rethink and we can re-educate and retrain ourselves. And the other issue with dealing with discouragement and negative aspects is to give it over to some other power, to something else, is a dynamic that can and has great use, but also to look at it. And to look at it in the silence, to look at it in the meditation. And that's true of our pain, it's true of our sorrow, it's true of our discouragement, to look at it and examine it. And very often, interestingly, we find that our discouragement, as I said a few moments ago, is something totally unrelated to what we believe it is. And it has to do with our relationship with ourselves, our view of ourselves, our view of our relationship with the divine, with God, and our view of our relationship with others. And that comes out and is reflected in an attitude or a manifestation of discouragement. And again, everybody's going to get discouraged. So nobody's going to avoid it. And so we're not talking about avoiding it. We're talking about mechanisms to deal with it. But back to meditation. Meditation is very useful, and silence is very useful. We just aren't silent enough, are we?
No, that's true. And we can have a soft music that's soothing and soft, and that's okay. But when we have the TV or the radio going constantly, then it makes our nerves be on edge. So we need to make sure that we make time for silence in our lives, and also to not be critical of other people and circumstances, but to just accept, well, yes, this is happening, and it might be happening for a positive reason. We can see positive results from whatever we're deploring at the moment. So if we spend our time worrying and being negative about our environment, our country, the world, the people in it, then we're pulling ourselves down. But when we see everything is happening for a purpose, and even the negative things, they have to happen in order for the good to occur. And if we look at life in that way, it's easier to accept that, yes, we have undesirable things going on in the world, but if we send positive thoughts out, and we can't be sending positive thoughts out unless we have silence, unless we do detach ourselves from the cacophony of all that's going on in the world. And so many people are, today, it seems more and more, need noise around them. They need to have have some kind of noise on. So if those who are listening to us, if they would just take time for silence in their lives, take time for a brief prayer, for a longer meditation. And it's trite to say that prayer is speaking to God and meditation is listening, but it is. And so we can get answers to questions in our meditation time that is phenomenal. And I know I've had fantastic answers to problems that I faced through just listening in my meditation. And I'm sure that you have too, haven't you?
Absolutely. And as you know, every time I give a lecture, I always incorporate a few moments of silence. And it's just amazing how difficult it is for some people because they've come to listen. They want to be entertained or they want to participate. But to have a few moments of silence and to be silent and to be quiet and to simply breathe. And so often, but then afterwards, many people will come and say, well, I haven't been silent and quiet except in your lecture for I don't know when. It's a little bit like the hugging that we do. We're big huggers at our meetings as well. And so often people will say, well, I haven't had anyone hug me. Well, that's a little different aspect of connection. But we do disconnect with life when we fail to enter into the state of silence. And silence doesn't have to be a long time, 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes of silence. It's amazing to me how many adults can't be silent and close their eyes and breathe for 3 minutes. And for heaven's sakes, if you can't allow your body to simply come into alignment and let the stress go, for 2 or 3 minutes, my goodness, out of 70 or 80 years, how much stress there must be. It's no wonder we explode.
Exactly. You know what they discovered at the Edgar Casey Foundation in Virginia Beach? That 30 seconds of meditation greatly changed the endorphin level in the body. The endorphins have been called the pleasure connection. So we're really doing ourselves a disservice if we don't take time for silence. And we can take time throughout the day, but we need to take an appreciable amount of time mornings and just get ourselves collected when we're back here on this earth. And when we do, it's so very well worth the time.
Absolutely. Hattie Garlish, the foundress of our fellowship, who lived to be 97 years old. Hattie believed we needed to put our minds and our bodies in neutral, and so we need to do that. And if we do it, then so many wonderful things happen. So many wonderful things happen in our physical being, in our mental being, and in our spiritual being.
There are so many wonderful books available today on breathing, and there's been one available for many years by a Swami out of India. But if we just, a lot of people would say, well, breathing is breathing, but it isn't. We need to take deep breaths, and we can gauge how we feel when we try different types of breathing. And I would like those who are listening to try that, to see how they feel if they take, for example, inhale to the count of 8, hold it to the count of 4, and then exhale to the count of 8. And that creates a specific rhythmic breathing. And then to breathe in different ways. And we all know about the Lamaze method of childbirth. And it's really exciting to be a coach, I know from experience. And the babies are born so much more easily and so much more wonderfully. And I think that's what happened in the more primitive cultures, and before we became so civilized, quote, uncivilized actually, that women were so relaxed when it was time to have the child be born, that the child was born very easily. And we know that when we fight pain, then the pain it grows vastly more intense, and that would be true in childbirth as well as any other pain for any other reason. So just the deep breathing lessens that pain. And I was a hospice volunteer for 10 years, and I've been with a lot of different people besides hospice who've been very ill. And just teaching them to breathe deeply makes all the difference in the world. And I was with 2 different women when they made their transition, and in both cases I'd shown them how to deep breathe, and they went out so easily that I felt it was because of their breathing that helped them to leave their bodies in such an effortless and happy and beautiful way. And it showed on their faces that they were just very, very, very beautifully at peace.
And that takes us back to this whole issue of being encouraged no matter what the circumstance is. And so the value that we have to applying these principles to every aspect of our life invites us and calls us to see the good in every experience, and even the discouraging experiences,
Yeah.
because we do grow stronger in them, don't we?
Yeah.
The childbirthing experience. Who would choose to have a child? The whole process. So many things that bring us seeming pain and suffering, and discouragement is one of those. Depression is one of those. And I always tell people, don't go looking for those things, because we'll have plenty of them. I mean, don't go out looking for problems, but a sign of life is, and a sign of a dynamic life is, and a rich life is, that it will be peppered, it will be filled with positive experiences and negative experiences, with encouragements and discouragements. But in the midst of our discouraging experiences, we can be encouraged, because we know that we're going to go through it. And even in Scripture, one of the things, and I do a fair amount of funerals, and so in the Psalms we say so often, we go through the valley of the shadow of death, and as we go through that valley, we come out on the other side. And so going through the valleys of life really bring us, and as we pivot towards the light and pivot our thinking and transition, wonderful and positive things begin to happen.
Yes, and it's all in our minds, isn't it? It's our perception. We go through life on a perception. And if our perception is in an upbeat way, then that's the way we live our lives. And we're far happier and more serene and more at peace in the world. And we owe it to ourselves to look to the good. That's a trite saying, look to the good and for the good and praise it. But and that means praise whatever happens, but we praise the good more fully. And so when we look at life as a whole, we would wonder, why be here? Why spend this time on earth if it's not to work through problems, if it's not to have things different when we're ready to leave this earth than when we came in our own minds and in the way we cope with things? Because all of life is lessons.
All of life is lessons, all of life is coping, and all of life is filled with discouragement. So go out and look for some discouragement so that you can be really encouraged. We hope that the ideas and concepts we've shared with you have been helpful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Mike and Iris would like to extend a cordial invitation for you to join them this Sunday morning at 11 a.m. for our weekly celebration service at the beautiful Seaport Marina Hotel at the corner of Pacific Coast Highway and 2nd Street, adjacent to the Marina Pacifica and Marketplace shopping centers. There will be a guided meditation, prayers, spirited music, and a dynamic, life-changing New Thought message. Please join us this Sunday. You will be warmly welcomed into the company of like-minded, positive, and uplifting people. And remember, whatever your dream, whatever your vision, you can attain it through confident living.